In the shadows of the Crimson Palace, where immortal bloodlines guard their purity like sacred fire, a forgotten maid hides a secret that could topple a throne. Seema came to the citadel with nothing but her silence and 2 children whose eyes mirror the king who once vanished from her life. When truth, prophecy, and forbidden love collide beneath the blood-red moon, one secret will shatter centuries of silence, and nothing in the immortal realm will ever be the same again. This isn't just a vampire romance. It's a story about survival, dignity, and the price of truth in a world built on bloodlines and lies. If this story gripped your heart, don't stop here. Hit subscribe for more powerful stories of forbidden love, secrets, and redemption that will leave you breathless. Like this video if you believe truth always finds its way. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if the love that destroyed you came back when the world told you it shouldn't? The evening fog in the immortal realm carried a bone-deep cold, the kind that crept through ancient stone and settled into the marrow. Inside the towering walls of the Crimson Palace, candles flickered to life one by one, their amber glow casting long, restless shadows across marble floors. In the eastern wing, far from the throne rooms and council chambers, Seema Hurst knelt beside a water basin, scrubbing blood-red wine stains from linen tablecloths. She was a black woman in her late 20s, with rich brown skin, weary eyes, and a quiet strength that clung to her like morning mist. Her co-workers, other palace servants, whispered about her sometimes. The foreigner with 2 strange children and no husband. But Seema never argued. She smiled politely, kept her head down, and continued working, keeping her thoughts locked behind the stillness in her gaze. Outside the servants' quarter, her children, Valen and Valina, waited near a stone bench beneath a gnarled oak tree. They were 6 years old, twins, though as different as moonlight and starfire. Valen was bold and restless, always asking questions no one wanted to answer. Valina was soft-spoken and watchful, with eyes that seemed to see too much for a child her age. They were dressed in simple linen tunics, hand-sewn by Seema herself in the dim hours before dawn. But it was their features that made people stare, snow-white hair that shimmered like silk, and piercing sapphire-blue eyes that gleamed even in shadow. Eyes that belonged to only one bloodline in all the realm. "Mama, when can we go home?" Valen asked, pressing his small face against the cool stone wall. "Soon, my love," Seema replied softly, her voice a gentle melody even in exhaustion. "Stay close. Don't wander." The children nodded. Seema's heart tightened as she watched them, so small, so trusting, waiting patiently in a world that would never welcome them if it knew the truth. Around midnight, the palace halls grew quiet. Most of the court had retired. The grand ballroom, once filled with laughter and clinking goblets, now stood empty except for a few servants clearing away crystal and silk. That was when he walked in. King Aldrin Valemere. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dressed in black and crimson, with a long cloak that trailed behind him like spilled ink. His expression was unreadable, cold, distant, like someone long accustomed to silence and control. Most in the immortal realm knew his name. Feared ruler. Prophesied king. A man who had not smiled in over 6 years. Few had ever seen him up close. Fewer still had survived his wrath. Seema didn't know any of that. To her, he was just another royal passing through, a shadow she'd learned to avoid. "Good evening, your majesty," she greeted quietly in the old tongue, bowing low. Aldrin glanced up, and froze. Her voice. It was soft, steady, achingly familiar. For a brief, dizzying second, the memory of another night, 6 years ago, flashed in his mind. A summer storm. A forbidden kiss. A woman with trembling hands and eyes full of hope he had no right to answer. His chest tightened. It couldn't be. That woman was gone. He had made sure of it. "Evening," he replied curtly, his voice like gravel. "I'm looking for Lady Marithia's correspondence. It was left in this hall." Seema nodded, moving carefully through the dim room. "I believe it's near the window ledge, my lord." As she reached for the sealed letter, Aldrin caught a reflection in the polished glass. 2 small faces. Watching from the courtyard outside. The boy waved. The girl smiled shyly. Aldrin's breath hitched. Their eyes. Sapphire blue. Their hair. Moon white. "Are those your children?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Seema froze for a heartbeat, then nodded carefully. "Yes, your majesty. They wait for me after duties." "They're twins?" "Yes." She didn't elaborate. She never did. Aldrin's gaze lingered on them, especially on the boy, the sharp tilt of his chin, the stubborn spark in his eyes. It felt unsettlingly familiar. He forced himself to look away, telling himself he was imagining things. He had no heirs. He never would. Outside, Valens suddenly stumbled on the cobblestones and scraped his palm. He didn't cry, he was too proud, but panic flickered in his wide blue eyes. Before Seema could rush out, Aldrin was already there, kneeling in front of the boy. "Easy now," he said gently, pulling a dark silk cloth from his coat. "Let me see." Valina stepped closer, clutching her brother's hand. "Are you a healer?" Aldrin's lips twitched, almost a smile. "No. But I know how to mend small wounds." Seema arrived, breathless and flustered. "Forgive us, Your Majesty. They should not trouble you." "It's no trouble." His voice was calm. Almost kind. When Seema looked up at him, something deep inside her chest shifted. A strange pull. A flicker of memory she had buried long ago. She brushed it off quickly. She'd met many people. This was just another powerful man passing through her life. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, as the moon hung heavy and red over the palace, Seema walked her children back to their small cottage on the edge of the citadel grounds. Mrs. Zaynora waited at the door with warm bread and worried eyes. Across the courtyard, hidden in shadow, King Aldrin Valemere stood at his tower window, watching. His hands trembled. His mind raced. And for the first time in 6 years, the prophecy echoed in his skull. "You will lose all you love, unless you shed all you were." He had thought it meant he would rule alone forever. But now, staring at those two impossible children with his eyes and his blood running through their veins, he realized the prophecy had already begun. 6 years ago, the storm came without warning. Seema had been in the Crimson Palace for only 3 months then, a young foreign woman brought across the sea by a traveling merchant who promised work and safety. She scrubbed floors, polished silver, and kept her eyes down. The other servants pitied her at first, then ignored her. She was invisible. That was safer. But on the night of the summer solstice, when the moon hung red and full over the immortal realm, everything changed. The grand hall had been filled with music and blood wine, with ancient vampires dressed in silk and cruelty. Seema had been ordered to serve, to move quietly between the tables, to refill goblets without being seen. She did as she was told. She always did. Until she stumbled. Her tray clattered to the marble floor, crystals shattering like stars across stone. The hall went silent. 100 immortal eyes turned toward her. She knelt immediately, trembling, whispering apologies in broken syllables. "Leave her." The voice cut through the silence like a blade. Deep. Commanding. Cold. Seema looked up. King Aldrin Valemere stood at the center of the hall, his crimson cloak pooling around him like spilled blood. His eyes, sharp and blue as winter ice, locked onto hers. For a moment, the world held its breath. "Go," he said quietly. "Before they decide your entertainment." She fled. But he followed. She didn't know why. She didn't understand the way his gaze had softened when it touched her face, or why a king would leave his own celebration to walk the shadowed corridors after a clumsy maid. She only knew that when she reached the servants' garden, gasping for air beneath the pale moonlight, he was there. "You shouldn't be kind to me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It will only make them hate me more." "They already hate you," Aldrin replied, stepping closer. "You're human. You're foreign. You exist where they believe you shouldn't. Then why protect me?" He hesitated. For the first time in decades, he didn't have an answer. The garden was silent except for the rustle of night blooms and the distant hum of the celebration inside. Seema should have bowed. Should have thanked him and disappeared. But something in his eyes stopped her. Something lonely. Something human, buried beneath centuries of ice. "What's your name?" he asked. "Seema," she whispered. "Seema Hurst." "Seema." He repeated it slowly, as if tasting something forbidden. "You don't belong here." "I know. You should leave. Tonight. Before this world devours you. I have nowhere else to go." Aldrin's jaw tightened. He looked away, as if the sight of her hurt. "Then you're already lost." She should have been afraid. But instead, she stepped closer. Are you? His eyes snapped back to hers, and for a heartbeat, the cold king cracked. She saw it, the war inside him, the prophecy that haunted his every breath, the curse that promised he would lose everything he dared to love. Yes, he said hoarsely. I've been lost for a very long time. And then, as if gravity itself shifted, he kissed her. It was not gentle. It was desperate, aching, the kind of kiss that tasted like goodbye even as it began. Seema's hands found his face, and she kissed him back with all the loneliness she had carried across oceans, all the fear she had swallowed in silence. They shouldn't have. But they did. That night, beneath the blood-red moon, a king forgot his crown. And the maid believed, just for a moment, that she was worth loving. When dawn broke, pale and unforgiving, Seema woke alone. The garden was empty. The palace was silent. And on the stone bench where Aldrin had whispered her name like a prayer, there was nothing but a single black rose, its petals edged in frost. No note. No explanation. No goodbye. Just absence. Seema pressed a hand to her stomach, not yet knowing that she carried the future of a kingdom inside her. She only knew that she had been touched by something powerful and fleeting, and that it had already vanished like smoke. She would not see him again for 6 years. But she would never forget the way a king had looked at her as if she were the only real thing in a world of ghosts. The cottage sat at the edge of the citadel grounds, half hidden by twisted oaks and morning fog. It was small, drafty, and smelled faintly of herbs and old wood. But it was theirs. Seema woke before dawn, as she always did. The twins were still asleep, curled together beneath a patchwork quilt Mrs. Zaynora had sewn from scraps. Valen's arm was flung protectively over his sister. Valina's white hair spilled across the pillow like moonlight. Seema watched them for a moment, her heart swelling and breaking all at once. They looked so peaceful. So innocent. They had no idea what they were. What danger slept in their veins. She dressed quietly in the dark, pulling on her worn servant's dress and tying her hair back with practiced efficiency. The palace bells would ring soon. She needed to be at her station before the nobles woke, before questions could be asked, before anyone looked at her too closely. Mrs. Zaynora emerged from the adjoining room, her silver hair pinned neatly, her dark eyes sharp despite the early hour. She was older, weathered, a woman who had survived too much to fear anything anymore. You didn't sleep, Zaynora said softly. I never do. You can't keep living like this, child. One foot in the palace, the other in hiding. Eventually, someone will notice. Seema tied her apron with trembling fingers. As long as they don't notice the children, I don't care what they see. Zaynora's expression softened. She reached out, steadying Seema's hands. They're growing. Their features are becoming harder to hide. Valen asked me yesterday why his hair isn't brown like yours. Seema's breath caught. What did you tell him? That he's special. That some gifts come from places we can't see. Zaynora paused. But he's clever, Seema. They both are. How much longer before they start asking about their father? The word landed like a stone in still water. Father. Seema turned away, busying herself with brewing tea over the small hearth. They don't need a father. They have me. They have you. They have his eyes. I know. And his bloodline. I know. Seema's voice cracked, just slightly. She steadied herself. Which is why no one can ever know. The council would take them. Or worse. Zaynora said nothing, but her silence was heavy with things left unspoken. Outside, the first light began to creep through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a raven cawed. Seema kissed the tops of her children's heads, careful not to wake them, and slipped out into the cold morning. The walk to the palace was long and quiet. She kept her head down, her steps quick. Other servants passed her on the path, some nodding in greeting, others pretending not to see her at all. She had learned not to expect friendship here. Survival was enough. Inside the palace, the eastern wing was already bustling. Candles were being lit, floors scrubbed, trays prepared. Seema fell into the rhythm easily, her hands moving without thought. Polish the silver. Fold the linens. Stay invisible. But halfway through the morning, as she passed beneath a grand archway, she heard voices. Did you see them? Those children near the servants' quarter? Seema froze. The ones with the white hair? Strange, isn't it? More than strange. Unnatural. No human child looks like that. Maybe she's been consorting with witches. You know how these foreigners are. Laughter. Cold and careless. Seema's hands clenched around the tray she carried. She forced herself to keep walking, to keep breathing, to swallow the rising panic in her throat. They were talking. People were noticing. It was only a matter of time. That evening, when she returned to the cottage, the twins were waiting for her at the door. Valen held up a handful of wildflowers, grinning. Valina clung to her skirt, eyes bright. Mama, we picked these for you. Seema knelt, pulling them both into her arms, holding them as if the world might try to rip them away. And perhaps it would. Thank you, my loves, she whispered. Behind them, Mrs. Zaynora stood in the doorway, her face grim. The storm was coming. They both knew it. And this time, there would be no running from it. Aldrin had not slept in 3 days. He stood at the window of his private chamber, staring out at the sprawling citadel below. The moon was waning, casting pale light over the stone courtyards and tangled gardens. Somewhere out there, in the shadows beyond the palace walls, those children slept. Those impossible children. He had tried to forget them. Tried to convince himself it was coincidence, a trick of the light, his mind playing cruel games after centuries of solitude. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw them. The boy's defiant grin. The girl's cautious smile. And those eyes. Blue as winter sky. Blue as his own. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Enter. Lord Zorik stepped inside, his long gray robes whispering against the floor. He was ancient, even by vampire standards, his face lined with centuries of secrets. He had served 3 kings before Aldrin, and he missed nothing. You summoned me, Your Majesty. Aldrin didn't turn from the window. The maid who works in the eastern wing. The foreign woman. What do you know of her? Zorik's expression didn't change, but his silence spoke volumes. Answer me. Her name is Seema Hurst, Zorik said carefully. She arrived 6 years ago. Alone. She works quietly, causes no trouble. She lives in the old cottage near the oak grove with her children and an elderly woman named Zaynora. Her children, Aldrin repeated, his voice low. Tell me about them. Zorik hesitated. That alone was unusual. The old advisor never hesitated. They are twins. A boy and a girl. 6 years old. 6 years. Aldrin's jaw tightened. And their appearance? Unusual, Zorik admitted. White hair. Blue eyes. The servants talk, of course. Some say the woman is cursed. Others say she's hiding something. What do you say? Zorik met his gaze, and for the first time in decades, Aldrin saw something close to pity in the old vampire's eyes. I say, Zorik began slowly, that 6 years ago, during the summer solstice, you disappeared from your own celebration. You were gone for hours. And when you returned, you looked like a man who had seen a ghost. Aldrin said nothing. I also say, Zorik continued, that approximately 9 months later, a foreign maid gave birth in secret. Mrs. Zaynora, who once served your late mother, left the palace to help her. No one questioned it at the time. The silence between them was deafening. You knew, Aldrin said quietly. I suspected. And you said nothing? What was there to say? Zorik's voice was gentle, almost sad. You had already made your choice. You left her. The prophecy. Don't. Aldrin's voice cracked like a whip. Don't speak to me of prophecy. Zorik bowed his head. Forgive me, Your Majesty. Aldrin turned back to the window, his hands gripping the stone ledge until his knuckles went white. The prophecy. Always the damned prophecy. The seer's words had haunted him since his coronation, whispered in blood and firelight. You will lose all you love unless you shed all you were. He had believed it meant he could never love. Never hold. Never keep. So he had walked away from the one thing that had made him feel human in over a century. And now she had given him children. Heirs. A family he had abandoned before it even began. The council cannot know, Aldrin said, his voice hard. If Duchess Marithia discovers this. She already suspects something, Zorik interrupted. She's been asking questions. Watching the servants. It's only a matter of time before she connects the truth. Aldrin's blood ran cold. Marithia. The Duchess of the Northern Court, obsessed with bloodline purity, convinced that any dilution of vampire heritage would bring ruin to the realm. If she learned that the king had fathered half-human children. We protect them, Aldrin said firmly. Quietly. Without drawing attention. And if the Duchess moves against them? Aldrin's eyes flashed, cold and lethal. Then she moves against me. Zorik studied him for a long moment. You intend to claim them? It wasn't a question. They are mine, Aldrin said, and the words felt like a vow. I will not abandon them again. Even if it costs you the throne? Aldrin finally turned to face him fully, and in his eyes burned something Zorik hadn't seen in years. Something dangerous and alive. Especially then. Zorik bowed deeply. Then we prepare for war, Your Majesty. Because the moment you acknowledge those children, the council will tear this realm apart to destroy them. Aldrin nodded slowly. The storm was no longer coming. It was already here. The council chamber was a place of shadows and old power. Vaulted ceilings stretched into darkness, and along the walls hung portraits of long-dead rulers, their painted eyes following every movement. At the center stood a circular table carved from black stone, its surface etched with ancient runes that pulsed faintly in the candlelight. Duchess Marithia arrived first, as she always did. She was tall and severe, her silver hair swept back from a face that might have been beautiful if not for the cruelty that lived in every line. Her gown was deep purple, embroidered with symbols of the old bloodlines, and she wore her heritage like armor. Duke Sirinth entered moments later, moving with the quiet grace of a predator. He was younger than Marithia but no less dangerous, his dark eyes missing nothing. Where she wielded power like a sword, he preferred the blade hidden in shadow. They were not alone. A dozen other council members filled the seats, representatives of the great vampire houses, each one ancient and entitled and convinced of their own importance. But it was Marithia who spoke first. We have a problem, she said, her voice cutting through the murmured conversations. A stain on the throne that threatens everything our ancestors built. The room fell silent. You speak in riddles, Duchess, said Lord Varon, a stocky vampire with iron-gray hair. If you have an accusation, make it plainly. Marithia's smile was razor-thin. Very well. The king has bastards. The word hung in the air like poison. Duke Sirinth leaned forward, his fingers steepled. That's a serious claim. Do you have proof? I have eyes, Marithia snapped. As do many of the servants. 2 children, twins, living in squalor at the edge of the citadel. White hair. Blue eyes. The Valemere features are unmistakable. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some council members exchanged glances. Others sat stone-faced, waiting. And their mother? Sirinth asked quietly. A human. A foreign maid named Seema Hurst. Marithia spat the name like a curse. She's been working in the palace for 6 years, right under our noses, hiding the king's shame. You assume they are the king's, said Lady Isara, an elegant vampire with frost-white skin. Features can be deceiving. Not these features, Marithia countered. The Valemere bloodline has remained pure for 7 centuries. Those eyes, that hair, they belong to one family and one family alone. The king lay with a human, and she bore him half-breed children. The disgust in her voice was palpable. Lord Varon shifted uncomfortably. Even if what you say is true, the king has acknowledged no heirs. These children, if they exist, have no claim. Not yet, Sirinth said softly. But what happens when he does acknowledge them? What happens when the realm learns that our king, the guardian of vampire purity, has diluted the royal line with human blood? Chaos, Marithia said with satisfaction. Rebellion. The lesser houses will see it as weakness. Our enemies will strike. And the prophecy. The prophecy is folklore, Lady Isara interrupted. The prophecy is warning, Marithia shot back. It speaks of bloodline corruption. Of kings who forsake their duty for fleeting mortal desires. We ignore it at our peril. Duke Sirinth rose slowly, his presence commanding immediate attention. What the Duchess is proposing, I believe, is action. The question is, what kind? Marithia's eyes gleamed. The children must disappear. Quietly. Along with their mother. You speak of murder, Varan said, his voice tight. I speak of preservation, Marithia corrected coldly. We have protected this realm for centuries. We will not allow one king's indiscretion to destroy it. And if the king discovers our involvement? Lady Isara asked. Then we remind him of his duty, Sirenth said smoothly. Kings are mortal in all the ways that matter. They can be replaced. The threat was clear. Marithia smiled. I propose we issue a decree. All unauthorized humans living on palace grounds must be removed. Immediately. For security purposes, of course. It was elegant. Clean. It gave them cover while accomplishing exactly what they wanted. One by one, hands rose around the table. The vote was nearly unanimous. It's settled then, Marithia said, rising from her seat. By week's end, the foreign woman and her children will be gone. The bloodline will be protected. And the king will remember where his true loyalty must lie. She swept from the chamber, Duke Sirenth close behind. Neither saw the shadow that detached from the corridor outside. Lord Zorik, who had heard every word, turned and moved swiftly through the darkness. The king needed to know. War had just been declared. The decree arrived at dawn, nailed to the servants' gate like a death sentence. By order of the Vampire Council, all unauthorized human residents occupying palace grounds must vacate within 3 days. Failure to comply will result in immediate removal and punishment under ancient law. Seema read it twice, her hands shaking so badly the parchment rustled like dead leaves. Around her, other servants whispered and pointed. Some looked at her with pity. Others with barely concealed satisfaction. She had 3 days to disappear. 3 days to pack up her children and vanish into a world that had no place for them. Mrs. Zaynora found her standing there, frozen, the decree clutched in her white-knuckled grip. Come, the older woman said quietly, taking her arm. We need to prepare. But before they could leave, a voice rang out across the courtyard. Well, well. The foreign whore finally gets what she deserves. Seema turned slowly. Duchess Marithia stood at the top of the palace steps, resplendent in deep crimson. Her entourage of noble ladies fanned out behind her like vultures. Her smile was vicious and triumphant. Did you truly think you could hide here forever? Marithia descended the stairs with deliberate grace, each step calculated for maximum effect. Did you think we wouldn't notice what you were hiding? Seema said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was the only shield a powerless woman possessed. But Marithia wasn't finished. Bring them out, she commanded. 2 palace guards emerged from the servants' quarter, and between them walked Valen and Valina, their small hands clasped together, their blue eyes wide with confusion and fear. No, Seema breathed. Please, they're just children. Children? Marithia laughed, cold and sharp. Is that what you call these abominations? She crossed to the twins, circling them like a predator examining prey. Valen stepped in front of his sister protectively, his jaw set in a way that was heartbreakingly familiar. Look at them, Marithia called out to the growing crowd of servants and minor nobles gathering in the courtyard. White hair. Blue eyes. Features that belonged to the royal bloodline and the royal bloodline alone. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This woman, Marithia continued, gesturing at Seema with disgust, seduced our king. She tricked him, trapped him, and bore these half-breed bastards in secret. And now she has the audacity to live among us, to work in our halls, to let her mongrel children breathe our air. That's not true, Seema said, her voice breaking. I never. Silence. Marithia's hand cracked across Seema's face with brutal force. Seema fell to her knees, tasting blood. Mama. Valina cried out, struggling against the guard's grip. Valen's eyes blazed with fury far too old for his 6 years. Don't touch her. Marithia ignored them both, addressing the crowd once more. This is what happens when humans forget their place. When they reach above their station and defile what is sacred. These children are proof of corruption, of weakness, of enough. The single word cut through the courtyard like a blade through silk. Every head turned. King Aldrin Valemir stood in the palace archway, his presence filling the space like gathering thunder. His eyes, cold and lethal, were fixed on Marithia. Step away from them, he said quietly. Marithia's smile didn't waver. Your Majesty, I am merely enforcing the council's decree. This woman and her children. I said step away. Something in his voice made even Marithia hesitate. She released Seema's arm and took a measured step back, though her expression remained defiant. Aldrin moved forward, his cloak trailing behind him like spilled ink. He stopped in front of Seema, who was still kneeling on the cold stone, blood trickling from her split lip. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. And in his eyes, she saw recognition. Regret. Something that might have been grief. Then he turned to the twins. Valen stared back at him with stubborn courage. Valina trembled but didn't look away. Aldrin's breath caught. They had his eyes. His hair. His defiant tilt of the chin. They were his. Release them, he commanded the guards. Your Majesty, Marithia began, the council has voted. I don't care what the council voted. Aldrin's voice was ice and iron. These children are under my personal protection. Anyone who touches them answers to me. Marithia's face went pale with rage. You cannot possibly mean to acknowledge these bastards. Aldrin turned to her slowly, and his smile was terrible. Try me. The courtyard had gone deathly silent. Aldrin's declaration hung in the air like a blade suspended over every neck. Servants pressed themselves against the walls. Minor nobles exchanged nervous glances. Even the guards stood frozen, uncertain whether to obey the council's decree or their king's command. Duchess Marithia recovered first, her composure sliding back into place like armor. Your Majesty, you're not thinking clearly. These children, this woman, they represent a threat to everything. What they represent, Aldrin interrupted coldly, is none of your concern. It is every member of this council's concern when the king jeopardizes the integrity of the bloodline. The bloodline? Aldrin's laugh was sharp and humorless. You speak of purity as if it were sacred. As if our kind haven't been slowly dying for centuries, so obsessed with perfection that we've forgotten how to live. He turned to face the crowd fully, his voice carrying across the courtyard with absolute authority. I am your king. Not by council appointment, not by popular vote, but by blood and ancient right. And I will not stand here and watch children be terrorized because they had the misfortune of being born. Marithia's eyes flashed with rage. They are half-human. Abominations. The prophecy warns. The prophecy, Aldrin said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, has been misinterpreted by fearful old vampires who would rather cling to the past than face the future. He moved toward the twins, who still stood between the guards, their small faces a mixture of fear and confusion. When he knelt before them, the entire courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Up close, there was no denying it. The resemblance was undeniable. Not just in their coloring, but in the set of their jaws, the shape of their faces, the fierce intelligence in their eyes. What are your names? He asked gently. The boy spoke first, his voice steady despite his trembling. Valen. Valina, the girl whispered. Aldrin's throat tightened. Even their names carried his bloodline. Valen. Valina. Valemere. Seema had given them his legacy even as she hid them from his world. Do you know who I am? He asked. Valen nodded slowly. You're the king. Yes. Aldrin paused, then added softly, and I'm your father. Gasps erupted throughout the courtyard. Marithia's face went white with fury. Valina's eyes filled with tears. Mama said you were gone. That you couldn't come back. Your mother, Aldrin said, his voice rough with emotion, was protecting you. From a world that wouldn't understand. From people who would hurt you because of what you are. And what are we? Valen asked, defiant even in his fear. Aldrin met his son's gaze steadily. You are mine. And no one in this realm or any other will harm you while I draw breath. He stood and turned to face Marithia, and the expression on his face made even the ancient duchess take an involuntary step backward. Hear me now, Aldrin commanded, his voice resonating with power. These children are of my blood. They are heirs to the Valemere throne. And their mother, he looked at Seema, still kneeling on the cold stone, will be treated with the respect due to the woman who gave me what I thought I could never have. You cannot do this, Marithia hissed. The council will never accept. Then the council can try to remove me. Aldrin's smile was cold and deadly. I welcome the attempt. He extended his hand to Seema. She stared at it for a long moment, this offering from the man who had left her in darkness 6 years ago. Part of her wanted to refuse, to cling to her pride, to protect herself from being hurt again. But her children were watching. And for them, she would swallow her pain. She took his hand. Aldrin pulled her to her feet with surprising gentleness, then turned to address the guards. Escort Mrs. Hurst and the children to the Eastern Tower. They are to be given rooms befitting their station. Anyone who interferes will answer to me personally. The guards hesitated only a moment before bowing. Yes, Your Majesty. As Seema gathered the twins close, Aldrin faced the crowd one final time. This matter is not open for debate. The children are under my protection. The decree is void. And if the council wishes to challenge me, they know where to find me. He swept from the courtyard, his cloak billowing behind him like dark wings. Behind him, Duchess Marethia stood trembling with rage. This isn't over, she whispered to Duke Sirinth, who had watched the entire scene from the shadows. No, Sirinth agreed quietly. It's only just begun. The ritual chamber lay deep beneath the palace, carved into living rock that had stood since the first vampires walked the realm. Torches burned with blue flame along the walls, casting dancing shadows across ancient symbols etched into stone. The air was thick with incense and something older, the weight of countless ceremonies performed over millennia. Aldrin stood at the center of the chamber, his jaw tight with tension. Beside him, Lord Zorik prepared the ritual implements with practiced precision, a silver bowl, a ceremonial blade, vials of rare herbs, and the bloodstone, a crystal that glowed faintly red in the torchlight. Are you certain about this? Zorik asked quietly. Once the ritual confirms what we both know to be true, there will be no hiding it. The entire council will be bound by the result. That's exactly why we're doing this, Aldrin replied. Let them see the truth with their own eyes. Let them try to deny it afterward. The chamber doors opened. Duchess Marethia entered first, her expression carved from ice. Duke Sirinth followed, along with 6 other senior council members. They arranged themselves around the ritual circle, their faces ranging from curious to openly hostile. Last came Seema, escorted by 2 guards, with Valen and Valina holding tightly to her hands. She had been dressed in simple but clean robes, her hair pulled back from her face. She looked terrified but resolute, her chin lifted with a dignity that made Aldrin's chest ache. The children's eyes were wide as they took in the strange chamber. This is unnecessary, Marethia said sharply. We all know what those children are. This spectacle proves nothing. Then you have nothing to fear from the results, Aldrin countered. The bloodstone has been used for 7 centuries to verify lineage. Its magic cannot be deceived or manipulated. It will show the truth. He gestured to Zorik. Proceed. The old advisor stepped forward, his voice taking on the formal cadence of ancient ritual. By blood and stone, by ancient law and elder magic, we seek truth. Let no lie stand in this sacred place. He beckoned to Aldrin first. Your Majesty. Aldrin extended his hand without hesitation. Zorik drew the ceremonial blade across his palm. Crimson blood, darker than human, welled up and dripped into the silver bowl. The bloodstone pulsed brighter, responding to the presence of royal blood. Now the children, Zorik said. Seema's grip on the twins tightened. Will it hurt them? Only a small cut, Zorik assured her. It will heal within minutes. Valen stepped forward first, trying to be brave despite his trembling. I'm not afraid. I know, Aldrin said softly. You have more courage than most warriors I've known. Zorik made a small cut on the boy's finger. Valen winced but didn't cry out. His blood dripped into the bowl, mixing with Aldrin's. The moment it touched, the bloodstone erupted with light. Brilliant blue-white radiance filled the chamber, so bright that several council members shielded their eyes. The symbols on the walls began to glow, pulsing in rhythm with an ancient heartbeat. The blood in the bowl swirled together, forming patterns that hung in the air like liquid constellation. And at the center, clear as any proclamation, the runes spelled out a single truth: direct bloodline. First generation. Legitimate heir. The light slowly faded. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Marethia's face had gone ashen. Duke Sirinth stared at the bowl with narrowed eyes. The other council members exchanged stunned glances. Now the girl, Zorik said, his voice shaking slightly. Valina stepped forward, her small hand finding her father's. Aldrin squeezed it gently as Zorik made the cut. Again, the stone blazed with light. Again, the runes appeared, identical to before. Direct bloodline. First generation. Legitimate heir. When the light faded this time, Aldrin turned to face the council, his eyes blazing with triumph and challenge. Does anyone wish to dispute the Bloodstone's judgment? Silence. Marithia's lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. The stone confirms parentage, not legitimacy. These children were born outside of royal marriage, to a human woman of no standing. They are bastards by law. Then the law, Aldrin said coldly, will change. You cannot simply. I am king, Aldrin interrupted, his voice echoing off the stone walls. I can do exactly that. These children are my heirs. The Bloodstone has confirmed what I already knew in my heart. He looked down at Valen and Valina, then at Seema, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. My family, he said firmly. And I will burn this entire realm to ash before I let anyone take them from me. The declaration hung in the chamber like a vow written in fire. War was no longer coming. It had arrived. The attack came at midnight, 3 days after the ritual. Aldrin was in his study, reviewing ancient laws that might protect his children's claim to the throne, when the first explosion shook the palace foundations. Stone dust rained from the ceiling. The candles flickered and went out. He was moving before the second blast hit, his vampire speed carrying him through the darkened corridors toward the eastern tower where Seema and the children slept. Behind him, alarm bells began to ring, their urgent clanging echoing through the citadel. The hallways were chaos. Servants fled in panic. Guards rushed toward the sounds of battle. And somewhere in the distance, he heard the clash of steel and the screams of the dying. The council had made their move. He reached the eastern tower to find the door blown off its hinges, smoke pouring from the entrance. His heart seized with terror. Seema, he roared, plunging into the haze. Inside, the room was destroyed. Furniture overturned, tapestries burning, the walls scorched black. But it was empty. Then he heard it, the sound of fighting from the floor above. He took the stairs 3 at a time and burst onto the upper landing to find a scene that stopped his breath. Mrs. Zaynora stood in front of a barricaded door, a bloodied sword in her weathered hands, 3 dead assassins at her feet. Her face was grim and splattered with blood that wasn't hers. They're inside, she gasped. I've held them off, but more are coming. Aldrin heard Seema's voice through the door, low and fierce, comforting the children. Something in his chest cracked open hearing her strength even in terror. Get behind me, he commanded Zaynora. 6 more assassins rounded the corner, dressed in black, their faces covered. They moved with lethal precision, fanning out to surround him. Aldrin smiled, and it was terrible. You have no idea what you've unleashed. He moved like death itself. The first assassin died before his blade cleared its sheath. The second managed a single strike that Aldrin caught barehanded, snapping the sword and the man's neck in one fluid motion. The third and fourth came together and fell together, their blood painting the walls in dark arcs. The last 2 hesitated, finally understanding their mistake. Run, Aldrin said softly. Tell Marithia what happens to those who threaten my family. They fled. Aldrin kicked open the barricaded door. Inside, Seema stood with a fireplace poker raised like a weapon, her body positioned between the cowering twins and any threat. Her eyes were wild with protective fury. When she saw him, something shifted in her expression, relief mixed with something fiercer. They came for the children, she said, her voice shaking with rage more than fear. I know. Aldrin crossed to them quickly, checking the twins for injuries. They were terrified but unharmed, clinging to their mother's skirts. Papa, Valina whispered. The word pierced him. I'm here, he said, gathering them close. You're safe now. Are we? Seema asked quietly, and the question held 6 years of abandonment, broken promises, and justified doubt. Aldrin met her eyes. I swear to you, on my crown and my life, no one will touch you again. The sounds of battle were growing closer. Shouts. Running feet. The clash of steel throughout the palace. Lord Zorik appeared in the doorway, bloodied but alive. Your Majesty, the northern wing has fallen to Marithia's forces. Duke Sirinth has seized the council chamber. They're declaring you unfit to rule and calling for your abdication. How many remain loyal? Perhaps 1/3 of the palace guard. Most of the younger nobles. It's not enough. Aldrin's jaw tightened. The council was making their play, using the chaos to stage a coup. They would kill his family, depose him, and install a more compliant ruler. He had 2 choices, surrender and watch his children die, or fight and risk losing everything. Evacuate everyone loyal to the southern courtyard, he ordered. We make our stand there. My king, we're outnumbered. I don't care if we're outnumbered 10-1, Aldrin said, his voice like iron. They want war? They'll have it. He turned to Seema. Can you fight? She lifted her chin, her eyes blazing. For my children? I'll burn the world. Something fierce and proud surged through him. This woman, who had survived abandonment and raised his heirs in secret, who had endured humiliation and threats, she was no helpless victim. She was a warrior who'd been forced to fight with silence instead of swords. Until now. Then we fight together, Aldrin said. He took her hand, and this time, she didn't hesitate. Outside, the palace burned. But inside the eastern tower, a family forged in fire prepared to claim their throne. Or die trying. By dawn, the southern courtyard had become a fortress. Loyal guards formed defensive lines around the perimeter while servants who refused to flee tended the wounded. Aldrin stood at the center, coordinating his forces with Lord Zorik, his armor stained with blood that wasn't his own. The battle had raged through the night, brutal and unrelenting. But it was the silence that worried him most. Marithia's forces had pulled back an hour ago, regrouping behind the council chamber. She was planning something. Something worse than a direct assault. Seema emerged from the makeshift infirmary, her hands still wet from washing bandages. The twins were sleeping finally, exhausted from fear, watched over by Mrs. Zaynora in a protected alcove. Seema's eyes found Aldrin's across the courtyard, and she moved toward him with quiet determination. They're coming again, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. But this time, Marithia won't use soldiers. Aldrin's jaw tightened. She'll use the law. The council. She'll try to strip my authority before witnesses and force me to yield. And if you don't? Then she'll execute all of us as traitors. Seema's breath caught, but her voice remained steady. What do we do? Before Aldrin could answer, the great bells began to toll. 3 times. The ancient signal for a formal council assembly that no king could refuse without forfeiting the throne. It's time, Lord Zorik said grimly. Within minutes, the southern courtyard filled with witnesses. Not just nobles and council members, but common vampires, servants, citizens who had heard rumors of the night's battle and come to see how their realm's fate would be decided. They crowded the balconies and archways, hundreds of eyes watching in tense silence. Duchess Marithia entered through the main gate, flanked by Duke Sirinth and a dozen council members in formal regalia. She walked with the confidence of someone who believed victory was already assured. Behind them came palace guards, not loyal to Aldrin, but to the council. Too many to fight. This would not be won with swords. Marithia stopped 10 paces from Aldrin and spoke loud enough for every witness to hear. King Aldrin Valemir, you stand accused of violating sacred law, corrupting the royal bloodline, and endangering the realm through reckless disregard for tradition and order. The council has voted. You will abdicate immediately, or face trial and execution. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Aldrin stepped forward, his voice carrying with absolute authority. I reject your accusation and your authority to make it. You have no choice, Marithia countered. 12 of the 15 council members have signed the decree. By ancient law, that is enough to remove a king. Ancient law also states, Lord Zorik interjected, that any decree affecting the royal bloodline must be challenged publicly. And that challenge can come from any member of the royal family. Marithia's smile was vicious. There is no royal family. Only a king, his bastards, and the human whore who bore them. The insult hung in the air like poison. And then Seema stepped forward. Every eye turned to her. This foreign woman in borrowed robes, with dirt under her fingernails and exhaustion in her eyes. This maid who had scrubbed floors and endured whispers and raised children in hiding. She walked past Aldrin, past the guards, until she stood directly before Duchess Marithia. You call me whore, Seema said, her voice quiet but clear as a bell. You call my children abominations. You speak of purity as if it were the only thing that matters. She turned to address the crowd, and something had shifted in her bearing. No longer the invisible servant. No longer the woman who kept her eyes down. I am Seema Hurst. I am human. I am foreign. I am everything you have been taught to despise. Her voice grew stronger. But I am also the woman who gave the king heirs when your precious pure bloodlines produced nothing but emptiness. I am the mother who raised those children alone, who taught them courage and kindness in a world that showed me neither. She looked at Marithia with eyes that burned. You speak of corruption? Look at yourselves. You are so obsessed with the past that you're murdering the future. You would rather rule over ashes than admit that strength can come from unexpected places. Seema's hands trembled, but her voice never wavered. My children carry royal blood. The bloodstone confirmed it. But more than that, they carry hope. They are proof that this realm can be more than cruelty and fear. She turned to face the assembled crowd fully. I am not asking for your approval. I am not begging for acceptance. I am telling you that I will stand beside the king. I will protect my children. And I will not be silenced by those who mistake tradition for truth. The courtyard was utterly silent. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a young vampire began to clap. Another joined. Then another. The applause spread like wildfire until it thundered through the courtyard, drowning out Marithia's protests. Aldrin stepped beside Seema and took her hand, raising it high. Behold, he called out, his voice ringing with power and pride, the mother of the crown. The woman who will stand as my queen. And the realm had its answer. 3 months later, the Crimson Palace had transformed. The scars of battle had been repaired, the blood washed from the stones, but the changes ran deeper than architecture. New faces filled the council chamber, younger vampires who had proven their loyalty during the uprising, along with representatives from houses that had been excluded for centuries. Duchess Marithia and her closest allies had been stripped of their titles and exiled to the outer territories, their power broken. Duke Sirinth, surprisingly, had survived. He'd switched sides at the critical moment, claiming he'd only supported Marithia to gather evidence of her treason. Aldrin didn't trust him, but he was useful. And in politics, usefulness often mattered more than trust. But tonight wasn't about politics. Tonight was about family. The grand hall blazed with thousands of candles, their light reflecting off polished marble and golden fixtures. Nobles and commoners alike filled the space, packed shoulder to witness what many had thought impossible. Outside, crowds gathered in the courtyards and streets, waiting for the bells to ring. In a private chamber adjoining the hall, Seema stood before a mirror, barely recognizing herself. The gown was midnight blue silk embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like stars. Her hair, usually pulled back in a simple knot, had been arranged in elegant braids woven with pearls. A circlet of white gold rested on her brow, delicate but unmistakable in its significance. Mrs. Zaynora stood behind her, tears streaming down her weathered face. You look like a queen. I feel like I'm pretending, Seema admitted quietly. You've never pretended a day in your life, child. You've survived. You've fought. You've earned every bit of this. A knock at the door. Valen and Valina rushed in, resplendent in formal attire, the boy in black and silver, the girl in white and gold. Their white hair had been braided with ribbons, their blue eyes shining with excitement. Mama, everyone's waiting. Valina exclaimed. You look beautiful, Valen added, then wrinkled his nose. But also kind of scary. Seema laughed despite her nerves and pulled them both into an embrace. No more scary than usual. That's what I'm afraid of, Valen muttered, making even Mrs. Zaynora chuckle. Another knock. Lord Zorik appeared, formal and dignified. Your Majesty, it's time. Your Majesty. The title still felt foreign on her ears, but Seema was learning to carry it. She took her children's hands and stepped into the corridor. The walk to the grand hall felt eternal and instantaneous all at once. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She had faced down assassins and stood before hostile councils, but this moment terrified her in a different way. This was permanent. This was real. This was her life transforming before witnesses. The great doors opened, and the hall fell silent. Every head turned. Hundreds of eyes fixed on her, some curious, some admiring, some still skeptical. But she held her head high and walked forward, her children beside her, their small hands anchoring her to purpose. At the end of the long aisle, Aldrin waited. He wore formal black robes trimmed in crimson and gold, the crown of the Veilmere line resting on his dark hair. But it was his eyes that held her, those blue eyes that mirrored their children's, filled now with something she'd never seen in them before. Peace. When she reached him, he took her hand, and the gesture felt like a vow all on its own. The high priest stepped forward, ancient and solemn, carrying a ceremonial crown on a velvet cushion. It was more delicate than Aldrin's, a circlet of intertwined silver and gold, set with sapphires the color of twilight. By ancient right and royal decree, the priest intoned, by blood proven and loyalty tested, by the will of the king and the voice of the realm, I present Seema Hurst to be crowned queen of the immortal realm, mother of heirs, protector of the future. He lifted the crown. Seema knelt, her hands trembling. The weight of the crown settled on her head, surprisingly light, yet carrying the heft of everything it represented. Rise, your majesty, the priest commanded. Seema stood, and the hall erupted in applause and cheers. Aldrin leaned close, his lips near her ear. I abandoned you once. I will never make that mistake again. I know, she whispered back. Because now I won't let you. His laugh was soft and genuine. The twins rushed forward, throwing their arms around both parents. The formal ceremony dissolved into something more precious, a family embracing while a kingdom watched and approved. Later, when the celebrations had quieted and the guests had departed, Aldrin found Seema on the tower balcony, looking out over the moonlit citadel. Regrets? He asked softly. She considered. I regret the years we lost. The pain we both carried. But I don't regret the journey that brought us here. She turned to face him. Our children are strong because I had to be. And perhaps we're better rulers because we understand what it means to be powerless. Aldrin pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. The prophecy, he murmured. You will lose all you love unless you shed all you were. And did you? Seema asked. Shed all you were? Yes. He kissed the top of her head. I was a king who ruled alone, who believed love was weakness. Now I'm a king who rules beside a queen who taught me that love is the only strength that matters. In the distance, the blood-red moon hung low over the realm. But in the Crimson Palace, beneath its ancient stones, a new story had begun. Not of perfection, but of family, forged in fire and sealed in love. Eternal.